My name is Deja Foxx. I'm 25 years old, which tends to be the elephant in the room. I was born and raised right here in Tucson, and I was raised by a single mom in Section 8 housing, on SNAP benefits, and Medicaid. I was a free lunch kid right here in our public schools. And so that is what got me started in politics, was that my access to the things I needed to just get by was by and large determined by our elected officials. And it wasn't until I was 15 years old when my mom was struggling with her own issues of substance abuse, navigating a rehabilitation process, and I was on my own. I bounced around and eventually ended up living with a boyfriend and his family here in South Tucson. Um, that I started to take political action. So that was a decade ago, if you can believe it, when I began attending school board meetings for Tucson Unified School District, where the sex education curriculum was last updated in the 80s. It was medically inaccurate. It didn't mention consent, and mine was taught to me by the baseball coach. Um, that is to say that it was at a disadvantage for young people like me who didn't have parents at home that were going to fill in those gaps. Um, and so I began attending school board meetings, sharing a very vulnerable personal story, and demanding an update to that curriculum. And I would bring my friends along to do the same, right? That really grassroots community organizing of my peers. And after 6 months, we won a legislative victory to rewrite that curriculum. For the next year and a half, I was appointed to the curriculum review board to update the curriculum in Tucson Unified School Districts. And it was where I got my start. It was hyper local, it was personal, and still is. I scaled up my work over the last decade. I've worked in clinics here in Tucson as a peer sex educator at our El Rio clinics. I've gone toe to toe with Republicans under Trump administration one when they attempted to defund Planned Parenthood centers where I got care when I had no money and no parents and no insurance. And I went on to be the first in my family to go to college because of good policy. I attended Columbia University and I worked on history making presidential campaigns like Kamala Harris's, behind the scenes as the influencer and surrogate strategist on her first presidential run, the 2020 primaries, and in front of the camera in 2024 as a surrogate, here on the Reproductive Freedoms bus tour in Arizona, and on the stage at the 2024 DNC. And I'm back here rooted in my hometown in this run for Arizona's 7th congressional district in this special election, because politics is still deeply personal to me. And I believe that we need a fighter, someone with that decade of advocacy experience to meet this moment.
So what was the tipping point to make the decision to run? I mean, I imagine a year ago you weren't considering running for Congress.
That's right. I mean, you're perceptive to notice that. My friends are quick to point out that uh, they asked me directly after the 2024 election and a very difficult loss for so many people across this country who know the stakes. So many of my friends would ask, when are you going to run? Sometimes seriously and sometimes joking. And I would tell them, hey guys, like I have been doing this for a decade. Since I was 15 years old, 16 years old, I went viral for the first time. My life was turned upside down, went from private to public, right? After millions of people saw me confront Jeff Flake over his attempts to defund Planned Parenthood. And I would remind people that all of my teenage years, my formative 20 somethings, right? I have been at the forefront of this movement. And it wasn't until I really began to look critically after the inauguration at the plans that Trump was laying out, right? It has been just over 100 days since he has been in office. And he has caused profound and irreparable damage. I believe that even people like me who organized through the first Trump administration, who, protested on the steps of the Supreme Court, his attempts to instate people like Amy Coney Barrett, right, in the middle of an election cycle, even for folks who have been paying attention, the speed at which he is dismantling our government, taking and redistributing wealth from families like ours to billionaires like his friends, is unprecedented. And so when this seat opened up through unforeseen circumstances, right? The passing of Raul Grijalva, a real progressive icon, one of the first members of Congress to invite me into his office as an activist, someone who holds a special place in so many of our hearts. I had to ask myself a few questions. First, did I have the support to do this, right? Politically, but also personally? People who were going to be in my corner. Running for office is not easy. It is a calling and a responsibility. Did I have the funds to do this? I am young and working class, right? It's not easy to run for office, and that is by design. And lastly, how would I feel if I sat this out? 22 years this seat has been held, nearly my lifetime. And as I look at our lessons from the 2024 election, people said loud and clear that age matters to them and that they want primary processes, right? They want to see healthy primaries. And in a district that hasn't seen a competitive congressional primary in my lifetime, I believe that people here deserve good options and that is the long-term strategy for our party and our democracy. And I feel compelled to be in this race by what is on the line for families like mine, who Donald Trump has put in his crosshairs.
I appreciate that. Not by design, but today was a big day politically. So can I get
No.
your reaction in terms of the budget bill and what you're most concerned about?
Yeah. I mean, we see Donald Trump and his Republican allies attempting in the middle of the night, mind you, by design, attempting to distract us and hide their efforts to strip millions of their access to health care, right? Cuts to things like Medicaid. Um, and take food off of the table of our most vulnerable families by reducing SNAP benefits, right? And I want to make this very clear. The kids that they are targeting, the families that they are targeting are folks just like me, right? I grew up in a household where we relied on Section 8 and SNAP and Medicaid just to get by. And it was because of good policy that I was able to go on to be the first in my family to go to college, why I am able to run for this office. We know that this is good policy, the kind of things that give people a hand up, a shot at getting ahead. But for people like Donald Trump, who have never made hard decisions in the grocery checkout line and probably have never even done their own grocery shopping, you can understand why they would rather find tax cuts for their billionaire buddies at the expense of our families. And so to say that I'm angry is an understatement. This is still personal for my family, for my neighbors, for my friends who are one car breakdown away from not making rent this month, right? Who rely on access here in Arizona. And so, what I want voters to understand in Congressional District 7 is that there is a difference between being a career politician who checks the boxes and someone like me who will be a champion because it is personal, because I've lived it. And when I see these Republicans attempting to push these cuts in the middle of the night, it has never been clearer to me why we need effective communicators in our party who can cut through the noise, who can cover their bad deeds and make clear to people here in our community here in Southern Arizona what is going on in DC, because chaos and distraction is their goal. And so we need more effective communicators, and that's something I uniquely offer. I have brought new strategies forward, amassed nearly 6 million views to date on our campaign content on Instagram and TikTok alone, without a single dollar of paid behind it, just good storytelling. And if we're going to compete with the other side, right, and their attempts to hide their efforts because they are unpopular to cut the services we rely on, then we need to build our bench of leadership in this party and elect effective messengers who can convey with clarity in new media and social media spaces what these people are doing and the ways we are fighting for our neighbors.
So I have been following you on social media. I've learned from you that you're knocking on doors on your own, talking to
Yeah,
people.
of course.
So I don't want to, I know what I hear in my circles, but what are you hearing when you're knocking door to door in South Tucson or somewhere else in CD7? What are residents telling you are their concerns right now?
Yeah, I mean, what we hear, we're knocking the doors of folks who regularly vote in primaries. And still, so many of them don't know we have a special election coming up on July 15th. It is the fact that this is likely to be a low turnout election. Um, and it is a disservice to our constituents to not get them involved in this process, right? Just walk with me here in that we have not had a competitive congressional in 22 years. It's not impossible that whoever wins in the next 50 something days may hold this seat for another 2 or 3 decades, which would leave this district without a competitive race outside of these 100 days for the span of some people's lifetimes. It is not good for our democracy or our party to not give people a healthy primary, not give them candidates they can get excited about and a process they can engage with. However, it is a fact that there are still people out there who are good primary voters who haven't made up their minds or don't know this election is happening. But when we do get to the doors and we chat with somebody and we share about this election and our candidacy, when we share this personal story, our connections to the things that are on the line, right? And that decade of experience on the other side of power, being an activist and an advocate, demanding better from our elected officials, people begin to understand that they have choices, that this is an open seat. With an opportunity to make history. If elected, I would be the youngest member of the body. I would be the first woman of my generation, Gen Z, elected, which matters because we are the first generation of women to have less rights than our mothers, and the first Filipina. And all of that, when we share this with people, that down here in Southern Arizona, with their vote, they have the opportunity to make history, we see them move to excitement. We see them move to action. And the last thing I'll share is that this is by no means a decided race. We still have our debates coming up. And for the average person, right, July 15th is far away. They're still worried about making June rent, all right? And we got to remember that. And our elected officials would do well to put themselves in the position of our voters, many of whom, when you ask about the issues, right, and this was the core of your question, are worried about just getting by. We know that they care about making rent this month, affording groceries, having health care, and protecting social services. Also, some of our seniors here are seeing the way the Trump administration is talking about cuts to Social Security, right? And that leads me to the next issue that we hear at the doors, which is that people don't feel fought for. Not only are they frustrated with the Trump administration, but they are frustrated with our party. The Democrats have a lower than ever approval rating, something in the 20%, I want to say 27%. And it's because they have lost touch with what people on the ground are talking about, are worried about, their everyday concerns around this affordability crisis. And people want someone who's going to stand up to this Trump administration who's throwing rules out the window. And we're uniquely positioned to do that because of my decade of activism and advocacy experience.
I want to take a moment. You mentioned that you are living in a generation that has less reproductive rights than the previous generation did. You've
Right.
obviously been well involved in this for the last 10 years. So, from your perspective, talk to me as somebody who's older and doesn't face the same issues that you do.
Sure.
What is the primary concern right now for your generation when it comes to reproductive rights, health, and safety?
Yeah.
What's the primary concern, and what do you hope to do if elected?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to frame this as a generational question because it is where we're seeing the coalition that is going to win this election for a candidate like me. We are seeing young women, women of Generation Z, my age, right, who are still making decisions about if and when to start a family. And that has everything to do with the kind of sex education you get in our public schools, things I fought for as a high schooler, your ability to access basic reproductive care like birth control, right? No matter how much income, no matter how much money's in your bank or, your zip code, you should have the opportunity to access that. And we're seeing cuts to places like Planned Parenthood on the line in these budget bills. We're seeing things like Medicaid on the line, access here in Arizona, which is what so many folks rely on just to make those basic reproductive decisions. And I'll share that if you do decide to have a family, more than half of babies born here in Arizona are born under access. Um, and so there is nothing pro-family about the agenda we see Donald Trump pushing through, and these Republicans. And the final thing I'll add around abortion, right, is that we have seen Roe versus Wade overturned, leaving women of my generation with less rights than our mothers had. Uh, and that is the message that's resonating with these older voters, these older women in particular that have known a time before Roe versus Wade and are now coming to know one after. Uh, and from those women at the doors, we so often hear that they are scared, that they're angry, that the things they fought for, they have watched overturned and are unsure that in their lifetime they will ever see them reinstated. And so they, more than anything, want to know that there is a champion and a fighter that's going to keep their work alive. And when we share our story, that decade of advocacy around this issue, we see them get excited, feel a sense of hope again, right? Inspiration and security, knowing that I intend to keep your fight alive. And that kind of promise and responsibility I hold with a lot of care, because I recognize that this run is possible for me because of the work generations ahead of me have done.
So we've talked about being a fighter. So what does that mean in practical terms?
Sorry about that. I had
No,
to make a quick comment off camera.
no,
Can you ask that one more time?
of course. You've talked about being a fighter. 6 months from now, it goes your way. You're in DC. What does that look like? How does that change lives for Southern Arizonans? What is that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question, right? Under a Trump trifecta, our ability to legislate and make change, right? To be on the offensive is challenging. And I won't lie to folks, I have fought under the first administration and know what it's like to have to play defense. Um, and that's a lot of what we're going to have to do right now is defend our families, defend social services that we rely on every day to just get by. And what I'll share is that from so many Democrats, what I'm hearing right now uh, is that they want to just put their heads down, that Donald Trump will go away. And what I say to those Democrats, right, those folks who are lacking in courage in this moment, is that our families who are worried about the month to month just making it by can't wait for Donald Trump to be out of office, right? And so I think what the difference looks like with somebody like me in office is first and foremost that I won't stop at just voting our way, right? I will go the extra mile to spotlight good personal stories, right? To bring people in who are often left out. I think about an event we just hosted around these Medicaid cuts. Here in my living room, we invited storytellers in to share the ways that they would be impacted. So many of them told us that they had never been invited to an event like this, that they had never had an opportunity to share their story in this way. And we heard from people who had lost family members to having delay healthcare, right? Had lost their mother. We talked to a young trans man who just recently got kicked off of Access and lost his ability to get gender affirming care, had to turn around because he couldn't afford his prescriptions. And so I want you to know that I bring a different level of accountability and transparency to this work, that I intend to bring in new voices, families that are working class like mine who have been left out of the conversation, and shine that light of this office on the consequences here in district for them. And secondly, I intend to bring my advocacy experience along with me to DC, right? In a moment in which we see members of Congress being jostled outside of ICE facilities, right? We see the Trump administration threatening them with arrest. We need people who are more than just career politicians. We need people who have advocacy experience. I've been arrested protesting on Capitol Hill in an act of civil disobedience after the overturn of Roe versus Wade, alongside movement leaders and just one or two Congress people. We should have more Congress people out there doing the work of advocates and activists, right? Using their positions of power to risk a little something because our families have a lot on the line. And so what I most want people to know is that when elected, they will have a fighter in me. They will never have to question if somebody in DC is fighting on their behalf. And what I hear is one of the most frequent complaints, and complaint is a soft word, right? Demands from our voters is that they are sitting out of this process. They are feeling left out because they do not feel fought for. And for me, that looks like showing up, not just in the halls of power, but also at the protests alongside them.
I want to turn the interview over to you for a moment. So
Sure.
I've asked all the questions and you're running for Congress. Why don't we talk about what I should have asked, what we haven't talked about that's really important for CD7 voters
Yeah.
to know about you and your platform?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I hope folks know that they can come get to know us, right? That I might be new to them, but that they have a big responsibility in Southern Arizona right now in this special election. That 2025 is the first referendum on our 2024 election. Did we learn our lessons? Or are we going to keep doing things the same way? And what we decide here in Southern Arizona in 2025, our special election, will have implications for the 2026 midterms. What kind of candidates get recruited, right? Endorsed and funded. And if we don't like the answers come 2026 or 2028, it will be because we did not make a bold choice here and now. And so I really can't impart with enough urgency that we need to make the right choice here. Because we lead the rest of the country with our votes. And it is not unlikely that this election will be decided by just a few hundred people, right, at the margin. And that could be you, your families, right? Your group chats, your graduating high school class could decide this election. And so I want folks to know that they have power, right? Their vote has power, their dollar has power. And for a young working class candidate like me, who has to do things differently because these systems were not built for people like us to participate, that your participation with us, getting in our corner, whether that's shipping a dollar or $5, showing up to a canvas, goes a long way.